2, 1, go. The outside looking in is the most fragile perspective when you suggest even the slightest contradiction to your movement. Moreover, you just can't stop people from having sex. Trigger warnings, I'm sorry I didn't do it before the speech, discrimination, and just really, really important stuff that we need to talk about, right? So I have 3 rebuttals for side government, right? First, they do not understand that the movement exists on a spectrum and are not all conservative. Hookup culture broadly applies to the movement as a whole, especially moderates and those who are liberal. We want them to be able to exercise their sexual identity in the name of liberation, and even if this is something that's going to be like challenged by them as being not like an important narrative, it's still something that those people do for the sake of that particular thing, right? Second, at best, government runs a negative case that does not fulfill their burden and is not comparative. 3 speakers and we don't know what opposing this particular thing looks like or what exclusivity it will do. They are right that on both sides, people will say shit, but on opposition, we are able to reclaim and redefine what this means, which is going to be an important frame, right? And third, just side the opposition's case is like literally why we need to support our side. They have a very biased and privileged way of looking at women. Oh, get a better job, the reinforcement of the double standard. We talked about backtracks the progress we have made. On both sides, women can get hate by haters, but things can get worse when you oppose this because we also need radical acceptance and actions for woken by women, right? Because these conservatives are taking radical action. So if we're going to have like a soft line in any sort of way, we're going to get eaten. So first push here is just why do we not make it intrinsic in the movement? I think government runs along a case of how we support this particular thing, right? But coexistence alongside this empowerment is not bad. Sure, we'll create impressions that like we're enabling it, but it's a mechanism for sexual liberation that's well within the movement's purpose, or at the very least some spectrum of it, right? Obviously, in cases of sexual exploitation, the feminist movement steps in and has separate advocacies for protecting victims. The correlation of hookup culture with these particular abuses has to be proven by government side as being high, and it is not, right? The comparative then is on how this impacts third-party observers, given that this is a value judgment debate, as Kuya Matt and Kuya Seth already explained how this particular thing affects the feminist movement as a whole, right? So first, how does this opposition empower misogynist rhetorics? The key frame here is that in conservative groups, the double standards is much more undeniable and it's at a higher rate. And I think both sides like concede to this, right? The way in which the opposition, right, is going to be able to regress the feminist movement is that conservative groups grasp control or is able to grasp control in these spaces. First, government wants to argue that they'll have like women lose value and men are all alpha alternative, but it's worse because these women are now more quote unquote less value, right? Because in opposition of the hookup culture, you eliminate this particular idea. This is why the radical action coming from the feminist movement is important in trying to shield these people, right? And even if it's not going to like shield all women, we just agree that not every women are going to be like feminists in the first place, right? However, the way at which we solve that particular thing is that we provide them the protection and the liberty to choose those particular lifestyle, for example. Second, you enhance the shame within themselves because they just want to have fun, explore the liberty, crash out, etc., right? Which is all under the scope of autonomy. They want to trade autonomy off by telling us that women strives for women empowerment and having a more valued position. And why cannot be the case when the feminist movement also fights for these things while just coexisting with the hookup culture as it is today, right? Women can still be CEOs. Women can still have a respectable job. Sure, you give them like this particular insulation that, oh, maybe you should choose another type of job, but that only applies to sex workers, right? That doesn't really apply to hookup culture as a whole, because like many medical professionals, for example, or many professionals in general, can still participate in these hookup cultures without really being discriminated against, right? Because you don't say your body count every single time. And third, the average people then looks at these people as being lesser, as not worthy of being fought for. Notice how this makes the situation they paint in status quo worse. Yes, we know that maybe people within the feminist movement are likely to not be ultra discriminatory, but the general consensus among general people becomes discussed for this high body count. Second impact, you commodify them even worse when you oppose. Because you give these conservative groups more ammunition, you paint every woman who participates in hookup culture as non-good examples. You exacerbate this particular narrative, which is why this opposition should not be supported, right? First, the commodification happens for the women who are being used as a measuring stick. Trad wives are better. Like they say now that we are right, meaning they're still going to continue to push back against this hookup culture or people who participate in this hookup culture. The difference then on their side is it's much worse because even the feminist movement are opposing this particular thing. Who has your back in this instance? So meaning you give back the rhetoric of men having like the only right to have these sort of like more intercourses, right? Because women now breaks that double standard and you take it away when you try to reverse or at the very least push back against this particular narrative. Now, let's borrow this mechanism of selective media from them. What do you think is going to happen? First, conservative social media now owners only platforms the against culture hookup narratives from the feminist movement. Second, podcast bros will use it as validation for their bigoted beliefs. And third, it seeps in through the newsfeed of the everyday person who's now going to believe this particular narrative of like people participating in hookup culture, meaning automatically bad, right? Meaning then, like the idea of us like just focusing on this more liberated perspective, right? And like these people not knowing the dangers. I don't think that every woman just don't know the dangers of this culture when they participate in it, right? We need to assume that they're responsible for the decisions they make. And we also have to believe that the feminist movement already have mechanisms to be able to protect these women or even these LGBTQIA plus individuals in these particular spaces. There's going to be reminders because you coexist with them. You don't outright support them. You don't call for them to participate in hookup culture. You just don't oppose them. And that is the difference that you get on our side that is much, much better than what they offer. Oppose.